各位嘉宾，大家好，我是国防大学国际关系研究所王彦君，很开心各位来参加今天的长风讲座。今天的长风讲座是深度对谈东亚地区如何因应中美冲突。我们很荣幸邀请到何思因教授为我们主持，并由文正仁博士与苏起博士。让我们首先欢迎主办单位长风基金会董事长江宜桦董事长上台致辞。
President Ma, Professor Moon, Professor Su, and Professor Ho, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second part of Fairwind's lecture. Yesterday, Professor Moon Hong-in gave us a very, very illuminating lecture on the politics and the inter-Korea relations, which was followed by a very, very high-quality discussion between the speaker and our audience. Today, for the second part of the lecture, we will invite Professor Moon Hong-in and Professor Su Chi to talk about the important question of how should the Eastern Asia countries cope with the situation of the confrontation between China and the United States. And the dialogue will be moderated by Professor He Yin. Professor He Yin is a distinguished professor of international political economy and foreign affairs at the Samkang University. He served as the Deputy Secretary General of National Security Council from 2008 to 2010. And I think he is very, very qualified to moderate the dialogue between two special advisors to their respective president. So please join me welcoming Professor He Yin.
Thank you, Yi-Hua. President Ma, Jung-Mo, and Su Chi. Let me give a very quick introduction to the background of our two distinguished scholars. Professor Chung-In Moon was a graduate from Yonsei University. And yesterday in private chat, he told me that his undergraduate major was Chinese philosophy. He could do a Chinese complex calligraphy. So I'm sure he understands China a lot. Then he moved on to study in the United States, taught in the United States for over 10 years. And it was during that time that he made friends with a number of scholars from Taiwan of my generation. And then he moved back to Yonsei University, his alma mater. And he told me that he assisted 3 progressive presidents of South Korea, Kim, Ru, and current Moon, President Moon. He definitely has a lot to say about the two inter-Korea relations. And I am sure that he will give us very enlightening remarks on how he views the current situation, either in East Asia as well as, well, let me be more blunt, Trump administration of the United States. And that should be an extremely interesting topic for all of us. And then let me give introduction to Dr. Su Chi. Well, actually, it doesn't need any introduction at all. So I should just skip that. Well, Su Chi, I've worked with him for many years, almost 3 decades, either in official capacity or in the academia. And he surprised me. Well, I was a fresh PhD, and I went to Academia Sinica to take the easier job. And then Suchi made a phone call to me and say, okay, you have enough rest and sleep in academia Seneca. So why don't you come over to 政治大学? So that's why I landed in my second job only after 3 months in academia Seneca in 政治大学. So I thank Suchi for that. And of course, Suchi is a top mind on international relations here. So I want to thank Yihua for bringing these two brightest minds on international security for our dialogue. I expect a very fruitful one. Thank you very much. So Professor Moon, I'll just let you have the mic, and you can take as much time as you like.
I'll rather be short rather than giving a long, lecture, because it is a round-table talk. But I will give just a Korean example, how we Koreans see the growing strategic rivalry between China and the U.S. Obviously, we see from the geopolitical competition and what IL theorists call the power transition, Chinese rise, somewhat relative decline of American power. And there is a big problem. And you go back to, Ogansky's basic argument, when any hegemonic powers, the growth of national power gets slowed, while challengers' power or revisionist power grow so fastly, then there will be a syndrome like challenger stepping in the tail of a hegemon called the tiger. And then general war might take place at the tangential point, particularly when challenger feels dissatisfaction with its status in international system. Therefore, what is really taking place is some kinds of power transition from the U.S. to Japan, to China. Therefore, according to the Ogansky and even Graham Allison, all kinds of power transition among hegemons have been violent, with the very few examples, such as power transition from Great Britain to United States in early 20th century. Therefore, what we are primarily concerned is about negative consequences of power transition. But the current strategic rivalry between China and the United States is not necessarily about the geopolitics or superior influence. It has a much deeper dimension. There is economic dimension. Of course, Chinese rise was engineered by its economic growth. China is a number 2 in the world. China is a number 1 in the trading volume, number 1 exporters in the world. China is a number 1 in terms of foreign reserve. The Chinese economic profile has become so dominant. And also, Chinese technological catch up with the United States, which really alarmed the United States. But Americans think that the Chinese growth is a product of unfair trade practices. And it has been product of so-called unfair technological competition. China has been driving techno-nationalism. Americans, even Michael Pence, Vice President Michael Pence mentioned yesterday, China has been stealing intellectual property rights from the United States. But that is a big issue. Therefore, some Americans now even arguing that the American allies and friends should think about redirecting supply chain networks with China, meaning diverting away from China in trade and investment. But for many countries, it will be extremely difficult because China accounts for 25% of South Korean total trade. United States, 9%, Japan, 7%. Therefore, it will be extremely difficult for South Korea to move away from China. It's neighboring countries, Therefore, economic competition is another important dimension of strategic rivalry. The dimension is about value. Now, value has becoming much more serious. Vice President Michael Pence said that China is violating universal values such as human rights, democracy, religious freedom. Okay, that's a very serious claim. And also the U.S. is defending those democratic activities in Hong Kong, which China is critical of. Therefore, in coming years, there will be a fierce competition over value. Okay? You know, when you talk about the universal value, but values are subjective. Okay? Now, Chinese would argue that their values are universal, but Americans would argue that they're different. Okay? For China, everything with Chinese characteristics. Therefore, democracy, Chinese characteristics, capitalism, Chinese characteristics, socialism, Chinese characteristics. But U.S. cannot accept that one. You know. Therefore, the value competition will be another round of strategic rivalry between China and the United States. Fourth dimension, I would say that the soft power competition, winning the international recognition. China has been very, very active in enhancing its international recognition. One Belt and One Road is not simply economic strategy or geopolitical strategy. It's a strategy to enhance Chinese soft power. Of course, I cannot say it was successful in winning soft power because One Belt, One Road strategy has encountered all kinds of transitional difficulties. However, still, China is doing One Belt, One Road strategy. Confucius Institute, okay, and China has been increasing its international aid to developing countries and etc. But again, for the United States has been championing human rights, democracy, okay, and other universal values. American mass culture, okay, and all students go to the United States rather than going to China, okay. That all underscores the supremacy of American soft power. But however, China will continue to challenge American preeminent position in soft power. Okay, those are the four major dimensions of strategic competition between China and the United States. Now, for South Korea, we are kind of sandwiched between the two. As I pointed out, we rely very heavily on the Chinese economy. Okay, China has a voice. China is a legal party to the armistice agreement in Korea. Therefore, it has a voice over the peace on the Korean Peninsula. But now, we kind of being sandwiched between China and the United States. There are intense domestic debates and discourses on how to overcome or escape from the strategic rivalry between China and the United States. One dominant school is a pro-balancing school. Therefore, South Korea, the United States share same values. Okay, we have been allies more than 70 years. Therefore, it is natural for us to join the U.S. in countering rise of China. It's a pro-balancing strategy. Most of the conservative elements in South Korea support this view. Okay, therefore, alliance is the most important one. Okay, and China is the only country. The U.S. is the only country which can protect us from North Korea, China, and etc. But there is a challenging view too. Is what I call the to borrow John Mearsheimer and even Kenneth Worth's bandwagoning school. They usually invoke the historical lesson. When there was a transition from the Ming Dynasty to Qing Dynasty, Korea took side with the Ming Dynasty, and we suffered a lot in early 17th centuries. Okay, and our king had to make a 9 times kowtow to the Qing Dynasty Emperor Hong Taizhou, and the historians usually argue that look, America is a declining power, China is a rising power. We should make a right choice, and right choice is going along with or bandwagoning Chinese rise. Okay, we should never commit the same mistake we did in 16th, 17th century. That is school, but I would say there's a very minority view in Korea. Third view is a standalone perspective. We cannot trust big powers. Korea was divided by superpowers. Okay? Korean War was a result of superpower rivalry, okay, during the Cold War period. They wished to stand alone. But within stand-alone school, there are two sub-schools. One is conservative schools. Conservatives argue that we should have nuclear weapons. We should project ourselves as a middle power, so that neither U.S. nor China nor Japan can, give a hard time to us. Okay. But another school is very, progressive school. That is what we should take a permanent neutral state position, so then we don't have to take a diplomacy of taking side. Okay, but those guys who propose a stand-alone strategy argue that we cannot trust big powers. We should stand alone by ourselves. Therefore, one is really, realist path with a nuclear weapon. Another one is very liberal path with the status of permanent neutral state. Fourth school is what I call the murder-through school. Okay, President Kim Dae-jung was an advocate of this murder-through school. Therefore, President Kim Dae-jung used to argue that when cow eat their grasses, cow doesn't eat, from only one side of the bank. Cow eat the grasses from both sides of the bank. Therefore, we do well with the United States on security issues, and we do well with China on economic issues. Therefore, in that way, we can do a double dipping. Why we should take side? Okay? That is why President Kim Dae-jung was very nice with the United States, and he was also very much nice. He was very nice with China, because particularly President Jiang Zemin really liked President Kim Dae-jung. Okay? That is a mothering through school. That the majority of Korean citizens support this mothering through. But the whole issue is whether we can have a political leadership with such a competent diplomacy to go through this competing, superpowers. When American power was dominant, Chinese power was still rising, and when there was a good relationship between Washington and Beijing, it was easier for us to do that. But now it's getting very, very difficult. For example, when we allowed the deployment of American THAAD system, high-altitude aerial, area defense system, missile defense system, we got the enormous economic sanctions from China. We are still suffering from the sanctions. In first 1 year of the THAAD deployment, our economic loss as a result of Chinese sanction was more than $8 billion. Okay. China is still not allowing the group tours to South Korea. They're only individual tours. Okay. And therefore, particularly, small shop owners and small and medium, firms, okay, extremely critical of our government that allowed the deployment of THAAD system in South Korea. Therefore, as that case reveals, it will be extremely difficult for us to take a more overt side with the United States, making China as an actual or potential enemy. Therefore, there are fundamental limits to this muddling through strategy. Finally, President Roh Moo-hyun has been arguing that we cannot pursue taking side diplomacy. We should transcend that strategy. Then he proposed the Northeast Asian Cooperation Initiative. That is what? Let us build the East Asian Economic Community first. Let us transform existing alliance system into some sort of collective security system through the multilateral security cooperation regime. Okay? It's very ideal. Therefore, he has been really modeling after European Union and European integration. Therefore, he has been supporting the application of European Union and Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, CSC and OSCE. Okay? Therefore, multilateralism. of course, the United States is not happy, and also a lot of conservatives in South Korea criticize that approach, okay? Because for them, ROK-US alliance is kind of religion, theology, okay? And therefore, if liberals talk about the multilateral security cooperation that transcends the alliance system, they argue that it is extremely dangerous. It's a very risky approach. However, liberals and progress in South Korea argue that we should go beyond collective defense security, collective defense system into collective security system, okay? And we should pursue economic community in Northeast Asia. We should pursue security community in Northeast Asia so that we don't have to worry about any kinds of external threat. Therefore, likewise, between China and the US, we are sandwiched, but we don't have a national consensus on which way to go, okay? And therefore, out of those things, I would argue that conservatives support pro-balancing through the strengthening of the alliance with the United States, okay? And they support, some ultra-right conservatives argues for less of nuclear weapons, even at the expense of ROK-US alliance, okay? But liberals and progressive support multilateral security cooperation regime and East Asian economic community ideas. And also some of extreme leftists argue that we should have a permanent neutral state, okay, without having any alliance. But ordinary people, they strongly support muddling through. They want to have a good relations with both China and the United States. Therefore, I don't know whether South Korean debate give us some kind of, South Korean debate shed some light on our discourses or not. But we do not have an answer, okay? The current Moon Jae-in government wanted to combine both. He wanted to continue alliance with the United States, yet he wanted to find some space for multilateral security cooperation regime and economic community building in Northeast Asia. But not that easy, because the American alliance is so predominant in South Korea. Therefore, it is very difficult to alter the course of discourses on our strategic positioning. I will stop here. Sorry, I gave a too long talk.
No, not at all.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Ho, for saying so many nice words about me. And thank Dr. Jiang for inviting me here. It's truly an honor to share the podium with Dr. Moon, whom we had met several times before. And also I'm greatly honored by the presence of President Ma, who must have so many other things to do, better things to do, and still show up here. I was given by Dr. Ho, say, 15 to 20 minutes. I like to divide my remarks, prepare remarks into 3 parts. The first part is about U.S.-China competition. Second, a little bit about Korean Peninsula. And third, about our own problem, the cross-strait relationship, the Taiwan Strait. U.S.-China competition. First of all, let me just tick off 6 points about U.S.-China competition. First, I think I like to clarify a bit. Maybe I may be wrong, but I disagree with the characterization here. It says U.S.-China confrontation. I don't think the relationship has reached that stage. It's still competition. I think competition is a better word. And there's a big difference between competition and confrontation. When you compete, you try to maximize the benefits at the lowest cost. That's how you compete. If some of you work in the business you would know. Even if you work in the government, you probably would know. But if you are into confrontation, you would go all out without consideration, without much consideration of the cost. So cost consideration is totally different between confrontation and competition. And I don't think US and China have reached that stage yet. Both, especially President Donald Trump, always has cost in mind. He's a businessman after all. He's always attentive to cost. So China likewise. So I think it's still quite a long distance from the confrontation. It's still competition. And this competition, my second point is that I'm sure most of you would agree, is that the US has taken the initiative in starting this confrontation, and China was rather passive, responsive, and silent. But China is still competing vigorously with the US for a long time, for the last 20 years. But they have been doing so very silently and very methodically. But they are competing with the US. But US, in my view, unfortunately, is talking, thinking, doing at the same time. They talk a lot about competition. They're doing something, but I don't think the US has already thought through about how to do it, where to compete, what to compete on, at what cost, that kind of thing. So, in other words, my third point is that the US right now is still building consensus on this issue. There's still not a strategy yet. The government, we can tell, the federal government is working hard. Various departments are working hard to forge a new strategy, competitive strategy, but still working on it. It's nothing in sight as far as I can tell. My fourth point is that despite the fact that the competition is emerging, I don't think we should have any illusion that we will go back to the good old days before. That is engagement. We enjoyed 4 decades of US-China engagement, which allow South Korea, Taiwan, and many others in this region a lot of room to maneuver, a lot of space to grow, and to coordinate, to help cooperate with each other. But those days are gone. We have to be prepared for a long-term period of US-China competition, like it or not. That's the way it is. And the competition may be over powers, soft power, hard power, values, or the systems and all that, or a number of things. But the period of competition is with us for the long time to come. We have to live with it. I feel sad for our younger generation. Okay, my fifth point is that this competition idea still not a. I would venture to say that it's probably a consensus between the parties, political parties, between the administration and the Congress, and generally speaking, within the Beltway, within the policy circle. But it's not yet a consensus among the people. So various polls have shown that American people are still divided on whether to pursue competition with China or not. One half, a little bit under one half, are still saying, "Wait a minute, we can still make friends. We should still cooperate." So the people, American people in general, remain to be convinced. And this is why the U.S. government officials, like recently Vice President Mike Pence went out for the second time. I mean, I see this as all part of a consensus building effort on the part of the Trump administration. My sixth point is that if American people remain to be convinced, then American allies especially remain to be convinced. Almost all, I would say almost all American allies are not convinced, are actually urging the U.S., who is the driver, who is driving the competition, are urging the U.S. to slow down a bit and urging both sides to find ways to live peacefully together. So this year alone, I'm actually in June, just this is 4 months ago. 4 months ago, Singaporean Prime Minister spoke up openly about the need to actually hedging. And then Australia, who is a staunch ally of the United States, and its new Prime Minister Morrison also recently spoke up about urging the U.S. and China to talk and to go soft on each other. So in other words, U.S.-China competition is emerging. It's there, but it's not a confrontation yet. There's still room to maneuver, and Taiwan and South Korea, we are caught in between. Taiwan and South Korea, we have a lot in common actually. We both are neighbors of the #1 world economy, the second world economy, and the third world economy. Only two of us enjoyed this pivotal, enviable role. So we are now sandwiched, as this is a word Dr. Moon used several times, among these three great powers. But I believe that if we manage carefully, we could still sail through safe and sound. Safe and sound. Now, my second part, I'd like to say something about Korean Peninsula. This is an issue, unfortunately, many of us in Taiwan, I believe, have not paid enough attention. Yesterday, we had dinner together, and I asked him how many political scientists are there in South Korea. South Korea population is twice Taiwan's population, roughly. And I remember we have Association of Political Science, Association of International Relations. So all people like us, Dr. Ho, me, and Dr. Jiang, we in academia, there are about 200 of us at most. And Dr. Moon said in South Korea, there are 2,000 political scientists. So the pool is rather small in Taiwan, And it's hard life in academia. You have to live long enough, you have to work hard enough to survive. So people begin to drift out, people begin to depart. So it's a field that's not thriving. It's a tough field, and very low salary. So people have too many things to concern themselves with, and Korean situation being, even though very nearby, but people don't pay much attention. Unfortunately, I happen to see a close linkage between Korean and Taiwan situation. I remember I already was out of the government already, out of President Ma's administration, his first term. He was running for re-election. And November, the end of November, December 2011, all of a sudden, Kim Jong-un's father passed away. And voila, Kim Jong-un showed up. And people in Taiwan were so unfamiliar with this guy, we even translated the name wrong. I'm in the media, and we didn't know, oh, who's this guy? I remember the name was translated as Kim Jong Un, silver, Kim Jong Un, yeah. So, but at that time, I thought to myself, I was out of government, I was not involved in any campaign, election campaign at all, but I thought to myself, and I remember I said openly, I said I would predict that President Ma would win his re-election. And my reasoning is as follows. My reasoning is that because Korea and Taiwan are closely watched by China and the US, and all of a sudden you have an unknown person coming up in North Korea who may do whatever nobody knows. A big question mark showed up in Pyongyang. And at that time, candidate Tsai Ing-wen was evasive, very evasive about her policy. She was a small question mark. So you have big question mark and a small question mark in Taiwan, big question mark in Seoul, in Pyongyang. So I thought to myself, in this case, Beijing and Washington would happily see President Ma reelected. Like him or not, he's a familiar. And his policies are well known and predictable. And you have President candidate Tsai, you would run some risk. And you don't want to run that risk when Kim Jong-un, an entirely new person, very young, showed up So in other words, Korea Peninsula and Taiwan Strait are linked. The linkage is very subtle, but it's there. This is why I always pay some attention to what's going on there. Having said that, I venture to predict again. I hope this would make Dr. Moon feel better. I know you sound a little bit worried, but my prediction is that, I read your paper, by the way, your speech yesterday about peacemaking, peacekeeping, peace building. I love these terminologies, and very, very, I read it with great interest and admiration. And I totally agree, many people like us, we say we totally agree. Most people don't totally agree. But I mean, I do. I think I totally agree with your points made in your paper. I just want to add that my prediction is that sometime next year, U.S. and U.S. being the main driver of this, as you mentioned, alliance, will drive the Korean Peninsula situation. My prediction, humbly, is that the U.S. and North Korea will reach some kind of agreement next year. Probably before the end of the summer. Probably. I don't know about the timing. Before April, President Moon would be very happy because Korea will have an election in April. But I don't know about the timing. But my prediction is that an agreement is in the pipeline. My reasoning is as follows. Most important base of my prediction is that good old Donald Trump is dying for re-election. And he already put himself in the campaign mode. He's already putting his government into a campaign mode. He's already doing that. His recent deal, which is very partial with China, is a good sign. He did not have to do it, but he wanted to have a partial, even though very partial, very primitive trade deal with China. But he want to close off this chapter, not completely, but to close off to make him look better in order to get ready for re-election. His drawing down U.S. troops in Afghanistan, and he's leaving northern Syria, And he refrains, which he paid heavy cost, political cost. He refrains from retaliation against Iran. He doesn't want to have another war in Middle East. I mean, all these signs show that President Trump is thinking about election. So, why North Korea is so important? Because President Trump's record on international affairs is, how should I put it more politely? Very, very... you know what I mean. He didn't do very well with NATO allies, with Europe, and the U.S. is losing influence in Middle East, throughout Middle East, and the U.S. Is not gaining much foothold in Southeast Asia, and against Russia, Ukraine, against China, everything, and look what's going on between Japan and Korea. They have been feuding and arguing with each other for 2 years now, and U.S. as the big ally, big brother, is not doing anything. So the record is not very encouraging. The only bright spot is North Korea. It's North Korea. And North Korea also, this issue is so simple, so understandable. And Kim Jong-un is such an interesting figure. I mean, picture with him would show Donald Trump as the guy in charge. He could tell, I had a victory. I won. I accomplished something. You don't have to worry about nuclear weapons anymore. I mean, the farmers will be happy. The a lot of American Republicans were very proud. And this single issue would allow him to brag around the country for many months. So for that reason alone, I think it's political, it's not policy. So he will try to reach a deal with North Korea, a deal between what in your paper said a big deal or a small deal. Big deal is preferred by U.S., which is almost complete denuclearization, which is impossible, or small deal, which North Korea offered, Yongbyon and some other facilities. So this new deal would be partial, would be somewhere between the big and small deals, and it would be Yongbyon plus. And U.S., this would allow President Trump to declare victory, and for Kim Jong-un to go on with his economic development, and South Korea probably will get a chance to strengthen, to start and build peace building, start the inter-Korean people-to-people exchanges, or some degree of government-to-government reduction of tension. Not completely happy. The conservatives will not be happy, but if Trump is happy, they have to be happy. Yeah. So this is my prediction. So next year, I think there's a pleasant surprise for President Moon. With my limited knowledge, not in any depth. Okay, that's my second part. In other words, why I'm so careful, so cheerful, and so optimistic about. I hope I will not be proven wrong, but I think I'm less worried about Korean situation because Korean, like Taiwan, you have a cancer. Your problem is like a cancer. It's chronic. It's a long term, and the big tumor is growing actually. But good fortune for you is that all the doctors are in. All the doctors are in, and all the doctors are attentive, and the doctors are talking to each other. They're consulting with each other. all the time. And they just have disagreements over how to treat the cancer. That's the crux in the Korean situation. But the problem with cross-strait, with Taiwan Strait, is that we have a cancer too, long-term, very chronic, very serious, and getting serious, a big tumor, and also growing, but the doctors are out. Doctors are not attentive. They may be pretending that there's no problem. And people are not educated. People don't know. The patient doesn't even know that we have a cancer. We live a good life. I mean, people have good bowl of noodles. We're very happy. 小确幸, little comfort, we're very happy. We don't realize that there's a tumor growing. This is our problem. So because of the lack of attention, doctors don't talk to each other. There's no medical treatment. So if something goes wrong, the tumor is to blow up, it'll be serious consequences. Recently, I spoke too much, but just 3 weeks ago, when President Ma sponsored a conference seminar exactly in the same room, here I gave a keynote. I spoke about 5 ifs, and I'll quickly run down my 5 ifs. These 5 ifs, if they are to be established, Taiwan would be in big trouble. Taiwan Strait will plunge into crisis. And these 5 ifs, not necessarily in this order of importance. Number 1 is that Hong Kong will have a district council election in November, end of November. And second if is, and if Hong Kong election turns out unfavorably for Beijing, I mean, make Beijing look bad. The second election is Taiwan's January election, and if President Tsai is to be re-elected, that would also make Xi Jinping look very bad. And third if is if Beijing concludes that DPP President Tsai will continue to rule Taiwan for the next 4 years or even 8 years. It will be long-term one-party rule in Taiwan. The fourth if is that if U.S. plays a big role in President Tsai's re-election. And the fifth, which I would say the most important, is whether President Xi Jinping would be severely criticized by the party, by his comrades, and his political enemies will galvanize, using Taiwan as an excuse to give him a hard time. And if that were to be the case, if all the 5 ifs are to be established, we will be in big trouble. I'm monitoring all 5 at the same time, and attaching different weight and to different degree. Sometimes this factor will go up, sometimes this factor will go down. At this moment, I would say U.S. factor, the U.S. factor is going down. For some time, for quite a number of months, I was very worried that U.S. factor will go up. But recently, after John Bolton left, by the way, John Bolton also played a big role in Korea. The reason why I'm so optimistic, partly also because he was gone. And he was the one always insisting on the big deal, on total denuclearization, even bombing North Korea. And the same with Taiwan. He's very, very, actually I know him very well. We met several times. But policy-wise, I totally disagree with what he has done. Now he's gone. I think that augurs well for peace in Taiwan Strait. So these factors go up and down. So American factor is going down. I don't know whether it's going to go up or not. DPP administration, President Tsai administration, as far as I could smell, is working on high-level visits. Either Taiwan's minister visiting U.S. or U.S. big guy coming to Taiwan. If that goes up, if that turns out to materialize, then the U.S. factor will go up. You know, we have to look at all these signs. And unfortunately, overall, I would say all the ifs, all the 5 ifs are building up. That's why I'm very, very concerned, more so than Korea, South Korea. If Tsai is to be reelected, as I said, we may plunge into crisis. If Mayor Han is to be elected, I would urge my compatriots not to sit completely happily as if we will go back to President Ma's golden years. We will not, because Taiwan will continue to be under severe political pressure. The good part is that we will not be faced with military pressure. We may be spared diplomatic sanctions. We may be spared economic sanctions. But political threat, the clouds, dark clouds, will be still hanging over our head. And we better be prepared for it. And this is why Mayor Han decided to put in his white paper, which I happen to have contributed a little bit, the idea that the ruling party and the opposition parties, after next January election, the political parties in Taiwan should sit down and have a dialogue about what to do with China, about China. This is a big idea for Mayor Han. This is a big idea for us. Taiwan has never done that, and I think it's about time that we start doing that, just to prepare ourselves for the possible future scenarios. It will not be the Wang Guogan impending doom and gloom. That's my translation. It will not be if Mayor Han is reelected, but we will be still, may not be impending doom, but the gloom will still be there. So we should still be prepared for what may come our way. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Well, before I open the floor to the audience, let me take full advantage of my moderatorship. 2 questions for you. For Professor Moon. Well, just to borrow a term Suchi used, doom. Do you have any doom scenario for Korean Peninsula? And if yes, what would be the time frame? That's my first question. The second question is, you mentioned twice that in South Korea, most people would love to muddle through the crisis, pretending there is no such problem across the border, northern border. And does that mean your security policy, South Korean security policy, is completely left in policy elites like you? That is, you don't have to pay much attention to the public opinion. That's my second question.
As to the first question, it's very difficult to predict, and particularly in the short-term prediction, it's very difficult. Medium to long-term prediction is easy, because by then people will forget what I predicted. But as opposed to Dr. Suchi's prediction, the things can go the other way around. Therefore, for example, North Korea set the deadline by December 31st this year. If the United States does not deliver any constructive proposals to North Korea, then Chairman Kim Jong-un declared that he will go for new way. What is new way? We are still guessing. But obviously, he may declare that North Korea is a nuclear weapon state, no longer nuclear negotiation with the United States. Second, he will emphasize the Chili Gangxing, the self-reliant strategy. Okay, that we don't rely anybody else. We can overcome the international sanction regimes. Third, he may intensify diplomatic effort with China and Russia as a way of undercutting American pressures. Fourth, he may resume test launching of ICBM and the second nuclear testing. But if the fourth element becomes evident, then President Trump might return to his old rhetoric of fire and fury. Okay, and if you look at American domestic political history, whenever there is external threat, there is an internal unity that works favorably toward the incumbent president. Therefore, on the one hand, because of his dismal performance in diplomacy, he may want to use the trade deal with China and North Korean nuclear deal as a kind of major card to play for his re-election. But if North Korea shows unruly behavior, then Trump might resort to hardline military action sometime January, February, March, that time period. Then tension can be heightened. And our government is really committed to prevent that kind of escalation on the Korean Peninsula. Therefore, in other words, there is, on the one hand, as Dr. Suchi pointed out, that there's a good chance, I would give a more probability to that option. That is what President Trump would use, trade deal with China and North Korean nuclear issue as a major diplomatic successes, so that he can sell them to American voters that I'm, diplomatic president. But that scenario works only when North Korea shows very complying behavior. Okay. But if not, if North Korea becomes unruly, then President Trump might have to be very, very, bold. He might pursue very hardline policy on North Korea. As to your second question, muddling through idea, muddling through is kind of wishful thinking on the part of the majority of South Koreans. But as to policymakers, we know how difficult it is. But we can muddle through if we unified Korean Peninsula, if North and South Korea enter consensual, peaceful unification, whatever form it might be. It could be one single unified nation state, federation, confederation, or union of North-South Korean state. Our government support the union of North-South Korean state, like the European Union. If that being the case, then our strategic reliance on the United States will be fundamentally curtailed. Then we don't have to be sandwiched between the US and China. The margin of diplomatic maneuver for us will be expanded. That is why our government has been trying to improve ties with North Korea. If we have a better relations with North Korea, if we don't have to do the annual joint military exercise and training with the United States, if we do not want any kinds of deployment of strategic weapons by the United States, then we don't have to worry about the opposition from China. If we do not allow additional THAAD deployment, if we do not allow the deployment of American intermediate-range ballistic missile in South Korea, then China would not have any hostile attitude towards South Korea. Therefore, what I'm saying is this: yes, adopting muddling through strategy is very difficult for us, okay? But it is people's wishful thinking. But if we can improve inter-Korean relations, then we can pursue, muddling through strategy, and also we can pursue transcending strategy, meaning what? The strategy to build the Northeast Asian community, okay? Economic community, security community. Then we don't have to worry about common enemies and common threat, okay? Then we'll have a much freedom, and then we can get away from, we can escape from the strategic rivalry between China and the United States.
Suchi, I have a question for you. In your 5 ifs, you briefly alluded to Xi Jinping's position, domestic position. We have exchanged ideas on the domestic politics of China, and how much weight you want to give the domestic politics or its weakened economy to your prediction?
Weak economy. China's economy is weakening for sure, but my understanding is that it's weaker than before. But compared with many other countries, it's not as weak as others. And China is going through what is some economists call managed decline. It's declining. It's declining since for over a decade now. I mean, since 2006, it's beginning to go down, but it's very slow pace. And I see they're still doing that. Of course, the U.S.-China trade war has inflicted some greater damage. I mean, China's trade with the U.S. has gone down. It used to be number one trading partner, and now it's the U.S. third trading partner. And the investment in China and Chinese investment going down. Sure, they suffer a bit. But overall, I don't think it's an issue that that'll be politicized inside China. That's the point. If Taiwan and Hong Kong elections both turned out to be quite unfavorable, it would be tantamount to the open failure of one country, two system. And Xi Jinping just mentioned one country, two system early this year. I mean, within 1 year, and his idea went flat. And there's no escape, especially regarding Taiwan. Regarding Hong Kong, Beijing has Carrie Lam in between managing the Hong Kong situation. But regarding Taiwan, Beijing, there's no buffer. All the pressure on Taiwan issue would go directly to Xi Jinping. And compare with other issues you mentioned, economy. I don't think economic problems will be strong enough, and emotional enough to galvanize, to mobilize, and energize his opponents to attack him. U.S.-China deteriorating relations will not do the trick. Hong Kong will not do the trick. But Taiwan, being the most emotional, most understood issue, I think could easily be used as a stick to hit on his head, and will be politicized at home, which will give him a hard time. There's no escape for him, no buffer. So this is why I'm quite worried, and all the signs that PRC is doing compare with the U.S. If you compare Chinese diplomacy and American diplomacy, the signs are very clear. U.S. is not doing much diplomacy these days. U.S. is alienating its allies. China, on the other hand, is making friends all over the place and actually strengthening its diplomatic maneuvers around especially in East Asia. I mean, look at Abe. You know, Abe, Xi Jinping may visit Japan next year, and Xi Jinping just visited India, and all the other countries, Southeast Asia. I mean, you know, Australia. So China, in my view, is using diplomacy to counter U.S. economic maneuvers, and this may, vis-a-vis Taiwan, this is not very good, because if something drastic is to be taken vis-a-vis Taiwan, China wants to ameliorate the international impact. So making friends with all these guys from Japan, Korea, on down to India, in a way, I mean, looks like it's innocuous diplomacy. But if you think about possible Taiwan scenario, this could be read as a preparation. This is what Deng Xiaoping did to Vietnam. Before Deng Xiaoping punished Vietnam in 1979, he visited U.S., he visited Japan. And just to give Soviet Union, Vietnam's #1 ally, some idea that, look, U.S. is with me, Japan is with me. So Moscow dare not do anything. Yeah, this is all big power game, and we in Taiwan should pay attention. Yeah, sure, it's daily news, but if you put them all together, you read them through, you may see something different. That's how I do it. Yeah, I hope I'm not overreading it, but that's my job.
Well, I hope as well. Okay, the floor is open. Questions? Yeah, over there.
Yes. Thank you. Dr. Moon, I'm really pleased to see you. You know, I was working in Korea, in Seoul for about 4 years. And I also attended your conference many times. I just want to ask you, because Donald Trump, just like Dr. Su said, that he's very interested in reach some compromise or reach some deal with Kim Jong-un, probably for his election. So in your views, do you really optimistic for the future, for the Korea Peninsula situation in the future within Donald Trump's administration time? Thank you very much.
I have to be optimistic. It's not a matter of being optimist or not. You know, I have to be optimistic. And without being optimistic, you cannot find solutions. And in fact, let me give you one story. The last year, Steve Biegun, American representative to the North Korea, came to Seoul, and we had about 1 hour meeting. And I was telling him that when I visited Washington 2 weeks ago, I discovered that the 30% of Washington pundits are skeptics, 30% pessimists, and 30% cynics. About 10% pessimists, but out of 10%, 9% are very cautious pessimists. I only see 1% of real optimists. And Steve Biegun told me that, "Hi, Professor Moon, I belong to that 1%. And then he was accompanied by the deputy, the assistant secretary, Alex Ong, Alex Ong, and and the one lady from the National Security Council, and Kevin Kim, and his 3 steps, and then he was pointing to all those 3 guys. 4 of us that belong to 1%, but more importantly, President Trump belongs to that 1%. But in the sense, I really buy Steve Biegun's the observation, and President Trump really believes in that he can solve North Korean nuclear problem. And he can tell American people, okay, Clinton failed, Bush failed, Obama failed, but I solved it without spending a single penny. I think that is the message he wanted to give American citizens, American voters in the next year's election. But and also given his tweet, we can clearly see that he's convinced that he can persuade Chairman Kim Jong-un to give up nuclear weapons. But I think that's a really good sign. And in that sense, I'm optimistic. Therefore, normative side of optimism, okay, I go for it. But once you have a normative commitment to optimism, then optimistic reality will come forward. Okay? Therefore, you got to be optimistic too.
Let me add two more reasons for optimism. One is that President Trump is mired in impeachment, and he wants to get out of it. He wants to divert attention. The more deeply he's mired, the more he wants to use foreign victory to deflect the pressure. The second reason is that Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, it's widely rumored and believed that he will quit the State Department. He will run for senator next year. And most likely candidate to succeed him is Stephen Biegun, B-I-E-G-U-N, who is the U.S. Special Representative for North Korea. He's in charge of negotiating with North Korea. So if he wants to be the top job, he wants to get a top job in the State Department, he needs to do something. So there's bureaucratic reason, and there's, again, political motivation of President Trump. So
thank you.
My guess.
Well, Suchi, your optimism is about South Korea. I thought you would have optimism for our country. Okay, I'll skip that. More questions? Yeah, Zhonglen.
The worst thing can happen is when you find your friend is talking with your enemy behind your back. My question first regarding to Suchi is that how much is it likely that we will find there's a Taiwan passing, that the United States conspire with China to do something is against Taiwan interests? And would you say that now is less likely than before? And the same question for Professor Moon. Is it the likely scenario that you will find there's a Korean passing or Seoul passing in the negotiation between United States with North Korea?
Please. Not sure. Well, I doubt U.S. and China will make a deal over Taiwan now. The reason is, main reason is that U.S. and China are not talking to each other at this moment, not at all. I mean, in Florida 2 years ago, they set up 4 channels: security, economic, and cultural, and cybersecurity. 4 channels of communication, and then they held several meetings into 2017, and they have only 1 or 2 2018, and this year 2019, zero dialogue. On the 4 channels, no talk at all. The only communication between U.S. and China now are Donald Trump and Xi Jinping's phone call, and Xi Jinping's, Donald Trump's letter, and that kind of thing. I mean, this is why I said, half jokingly, that the doctors are out. They're not attentive to the patient, attentive to the cancer. They're not consulting with each other. So in case something goes wrong, they're ill prepared for the crisis. And Taiwan's trouble will be, this is why I'm worried if all of a sudden China decides to put pressure on Taiwan. especially through military means, then U.S. would be caught off guard, and since Taiwan is so far away, it takes 12 to 14 days from San Diego, California, your school, your university, to come to help us, and then so most likely result of PRC pressure, military threat through military threat is not invasion of Taiwan, but U.S. quickly coming to negotiate with China, ill-prepared. U.S. is ill-prepared, and China is totally prepared. They will sit down and talk. So at that point, President Tsai will be proven right. Taiwan will become another Hong Kong. It's just like Taiwan's future will be decided by two great powers without our participation. In other words, Taiwan plays no role in the role in the U.S.-China deal. That's when the crux comes. But before then, I'm worried, but there's nothing we can do because the doctors are out. They're too busy with other things. Yeah.
I don't worry about Korea passing syndrome. Reason is very simple. The last year, President Moon played the role of a mediator and facilitator. And since the Hanoi summit in February, we're having some hard time. But since November last year, South Korea and the United States formed a working committee between Steve Biegun and Ambassador Lee Do-hun of our foreign ministry. They meet every 2 weeks. We have a very close consultation between Seoul and Washington. Therefore, in fact, we are on the same side, which in fact upset North Koreans, okay? And initially, North Koreans thought that South Korea would work with North Korea in persuading the United States. But for us, our calculation is very simple. It is better to persuade the United States when we take side with the United States. Okay? In that way, we can feed a lot of proposals that North Korea would prefer. Therefore, we have been purposefully working closely with the United States. But North Korea has been somewhat unhappy about that behavior. But since we are on the same side with the United States, we cannot be passed by.
So you have doctors, and we don't have. Yeah, over there.
I think don't look down upon ourselves. Don't look down upon ourselves. Don't say we can play nothing. We are no roles on this game. I think we play an important role in this game. I think we should have strong reason for optimistic. This is my comment. I want to like your reflection, your opinion. I think the West is going down and the East is coming up. You see, the rise of South Korea and the rise of China is a symbol of the rising of, of East. And going down, you see, UK, Britain, 19th century, the flag never going down, but now it's gone. USA could be gone one day in the future. Don't always think him as a big brother, and we always have to listen to him. I think the key is peace. If we have peace, the East will going up. But if we have war, USA will make a lot of money because they are the best weapons, and they spend much R&D and investment on the design and the manufacture and make the best weapons and best military. So if China wants to use military power to solve the Taiwan problem, I think that's very stupid. One way for us, peace. Then we all enjoy peace and enjoy going up, because we will never be 东亚病夫. Before the West, all we call us is the Asian, patients, the Eastern, Oriental patients, and they are all the West power, the West strong power, 西方列强. Like mountain climbing. When you go to the top, you are going down. We are on the bottom, we are going up, and they are on the top, they are going down. So I think my comment is, let's trust ourselves. We play a role. We have to choose peace, not war. Let's work together for peace. This is a goal, this is a destination. Not one step we can reach it, but we can reach it. Let's take off. Let's go to that direction. I think we are going up because 西方没落，东方要兴起，大家一起来鼓励。Thank you so much.
Okay,
this is my opinion. This is my comment. Thank you.
Any more questions? Yes, over there.
My question is about the role of China in the North Korea and South Korea relationship. And the reason why I'm asking this question is that I thought that China has very strong influence on North Korea. And so I thought that the United States would like to ask China to help to solve the problem of the Kim Jong-un. But Donald Trump still established the trade war between the U.S. and China. So it's kind of contradictory to this idea. So I'm wondering if the China has lost its influence on North Korea, and so the United States is not counting on China to solve the problem. So perhaps the Professor Moon can help me to clear it up.
President Xi Jinping's policy on North Korean nuclear is very clear. He laid down the 3 principles. First, peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. Second, denuclearization of entire Korean Peninsula. Third, peaceful resolution of all pending issues through dialogue and negotiation. And also he set the 3 strategies. First strategy is so-called the double suspension. North Korea suspend nuclear testing and ballistic missile testing. Second, and then US and South Korea suspend the joint military exercise and training. That is a double suspension. Another one is a so-called two-track approach. Let us first denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and peace regime on the Korean Peninsula simultaneously. And third one, incremental simultaneous exchange between the US and North Korea. In fact, the South Korean policy is very similar to the Chinese policy. And within that framework, China has been extremely cooperative with the United States. China doesn't want the nuclear North Korea, okay? And China has been fully complying with the UN Security Council sanction resolutions. There are some exceptions. When President Xi Jinping visited Pyongyang in late June, it is known that China provided North Korea with 800,000 metric tons of food. But that is not violation of UN Security Council resolutions. For example, since after the Hanoi, there was no communication between North Korea and the United States. But it was President Xi Jinping who went to Pyongyang, picked up the letter from Chairman Kim Jong-un, delivered it to President Trump, which in turn made possible June 30 Panmunjom summit, okay, between President Trump and Chairman Kim Jong-un. Therefore, China has been playing a very important role in facilitating process, but Chinese position is very clear as to the nuclear issue that is between DPRK and the US. North Korea is going to nuclear weapons because of their fear of American nuclear threat. Okay? Therefore, that should be resolved between DPRK, and the U.S. Okay? Therefore, in the sense, China has been making very important contribution. Whenever there is a crisis, China intervened, tried to reverse trend. But of course, as you know, North Korea would never make a concession to China that can threaten their own survival. Okay? On that issue, there is no compromise from North Korea.
Professor Moon, okay, you raise your question first.
I'd like to follow up on this question, if I may, to Dr. Moon. After all, you're distinguished. We don't get people like you coming here to Taipei very often. How do the Chinese and the Japanese view the possibility of Korean reunification? Rhetorics aside. Rhetorics aside.
My question is actually, my question is very close to his. In your presentation as well as your Q&A, there's a salient piece missing. That is Japan's role. So I don't quite remember you mentioned Japan at all in the past 2 hours. So basically, this is the same question.
Okay, then let me. I conducted quite extensive interviews with policymakers and intellectual leaders in China and the United States, in Japan. I have one book on China, one book on Japan, and I asked exactly the same questions. Chinese view is very simple, Putong Buluan, therefore neither unification nor war on the Korean Peninsula. That is a basic approach. Therefore, in other words, any unification that achieved through the mutual consensus between North and South Korea, China had no objection at all. But China would oppose if South Korea take over North Korea, like Germany, and so that American influence can reach northern part of Korean Peninsula. They strongly opposed. And also China doesn't want unification through after the collapse of North Korea, because there will be huge influx of refugees from North Korea into northeastern provinces. Japan, in fact, you may know Funabashi Yoichi. And I had an interview with Funabashi Yoichi. Funabashi Yoichi was a chief editor of Asahi Shimbun, Asahi newspaper, a very well-known liberal and the specialist in alliance and etc. I asked a question to him, what would be the most pronounced national security threat to Japan in 100 years? And I asked, would it Japan, Russia? He said, no. Either China, Russia? He said, no. I was born in Beijing, and I was a correspondent in Beijing for 8 years. In 100 years, the powerful China will disappear. Therefore, China will not be a threat to us. Russia, really, Russian leadership cannot extend their power to the Far Eastern part. Then why are you so concerned? Why are you emphasizing alliance with the United States? And his sense is a unified Korea with nuclear weapons, armed with nationalism. I was surprised. He's a very liberal person. But if you look at the, Abe cabinet's overall attitude, there is a kind of fear of unified Korea. But again, on surface, what Japanese call the tatemaide, on outer expression, they support the peaceful unification. But Japan, like the United States, want the unification of the Korean Peninsula in South Korean terms. But Japanese honne, the real intention is this, Japanese. It seems to me that the Japanese, intellectuals prefer some kind of status quo on the Korean Peninsula. And now going back to, Dr. Hurst's question about role of Japan. In fact, I was asked by Japanese scholars that question because I gave a talk at Keio University in February this year, and I was talking about the peace process on the Korean Peninsula. Then I talk about North Korea, South Korea, China, and the U.S., okay, which are all the legal and the practical parties to armistice agreement. I omitted Japan. And Japanese audience was so angry. How could you miss Japan? And I didn't think about all political implication, and I just simply told them, bluntly told the Japanese audience, Japan has no role in peacemaking in Korea, but Japan can make a contribution after unification, or even, for example, nuclear issue. Yeah, Japan could provide important the resources for the verification process. Yeah, we would welcome, but Japan cannot be direct parties to peacemaking on the Korean Peninsula. But in the process of unification, post-nuclear development of North Korea, Japan can play a very important role. But in fact, the peacemaking and building in Korea, it appears to me there is no direct role for Japan. I'm very sorry to say that one. And also, Japan has been taking sides with the United States. Therefore, Japan can go along with the United States, and they have been consulting very closely, you know. I'm very sorry about that one.
Okay, okay, close. Oh, continue. Okay, good. Oh, please.
看没有人问了，我就问一个。I have been watching what happened in inter-Korea relations and cross-strait relations, and compare the two. This month, for our country, it's interesting that on October 1st, that was the 70th founding of the PRC. But yesterday was the date 70 years ago of a critical battle, Guningtou, which actually deterred mainland China to take over Jinmen and Taiwan. But in the last 70 years, you can see the development in South Korea and China are very different. We have seen a lot of meetings between leaders of the two Koreas in the last 30 years. And you have also signed quite a number of peaceful unification agreements, but very little was accomplished. In the case of the mainland China and Taiwan, we started the reconciliation roughly 30 years ago. And of course, the issue of unification is still not ready for us, but at least as far as people-to-people contact are concerned, we have really accomplished a lot. For instance, at this moment, every year, roughly almost 10 million people visit each other across the Taiwan Strait. But nothing of this sort happened in the Korean Peninsula. I'm sure you also understand the great difference. My question is, why is that?
President Ma, you raised the most painful question to me. And your idea of 16 words, it's very popular in Korea, 建立互信, 各自, 建议. And third one is, 秋冬, 추니, and 共창, 双赢. Therefore, those are very popular. Even I gave my midterm exam on the, President Ma's 16 words in the cross-strait relations. And you raised the really most difficult question. Why can we do that? The reason is very simple. The depths of distrust is so deep and so wide. And where those distrust comes from, it has something to do with the American forces in South Korea. The North Koreans are extremely fearful of the United States because they went through the Korean War. Pyongyang, the largest city in North Korea, Pyongyang was totally destroyed. There was not a single, sound building in Pyongyang. Therefore, North Korean fear of Americans still there. Therefore, for example, right now, last year, we had the Panmunjom Declaration on April 27th. And then we had the September 19th Pyongyang Declaration. Everything was so going well. But why nothing happened? Now North Koreans accuse that, look, we suspended nuclear testing and ballistic missile testing throughout the entire 2018. And they accused you, South Korea and the United States, have been conducting joint military exercise and training. South Korea has been importing F-35 stealth fighter from the United States, okay? And United States, therefore, in other words, what North Koreans are arguing is that South Korea, you agreed all those kinds of things, you haven't delivered. You haven't resumed the Kaesong Industrial Complex. You haven't resumed Mount Kumgang Choice project. Then for us, two things. One is we have our obligation with the United States. The United States does not want us to go ahead of US-DPRK relations. Therefore, inter-Korean relations cannot go ahead of US-DPRK relations. Therefore, we have been fine-tuning with the United States. North Korea is not happy. Okay? And also another important point is this: in order to support North Korea, then we should spend the Inter-Korean Cooperation Fund. The National Assembly should approve it. Then we have a very strong conservative opposition. We are having a hard time. But most importantly, we haven't been able to deliver what we agreed because of United Nations Security Council sanctioned resolutions. Therefore, we have all kinds of external and internal issues. Therefore, Taiwan is much freer than us in promoting exchange and cooperation with mainland. And also, I really, even though Dr. Suchi was saying the possibility of all this political military influence coming from China, but I think there is kind of trust between mainland China and Taiwan that there wouldn't be overt military actions and whatever. But in the case of North-South Korea, okay, we have almost 600,000 soldiers. North Korea has another 700,000 soldiers, okay, confronting each other. But 150 miles, military demarcation line. It's a tense. Therefore, I'm not blaming all other factors, but that's the reality, That is why I'm sorry to say that, but we haven't delivered what we agreed because of complexity of issues. And also, to be honest with you, unless North Korea really delivers complete denuclearization, it will be extremely hard for us to push for fuller exchange and cooperation with North Korea. That is why we are having a hard time.
No, I'm sorry, I have a follow-up question. I think you're quite right. The lack of mutual trust in two Koreas, or mainland China and Taiwan, are the basic reason why the problems are still like they are today. But it's interesting to note that in the Korean situation, very few people in South Korea do not support unification. Most people like to see unification. But this is not quite the case in Taiwan. The support rate of unification is probably lower than 30%. But on the other hand, in the last 30 years, the people of the two sides of the Taiwan Strait have a lot of contact, changes, whatever, which is far ahead of the people of North Korea and South Korea. And here, some people still support the Taiwan independence. They don't want unification, but I don't see anyone in South Korea that support the independence of South Korea. So there are differences, there are similarities. How do you see it?
That's another very tough question. But it all depends on how you define unification. Unification could mean one nation, meaning one people, one state, one government, one system. Okay? North Korea won that kind of unification through the United Front strategy. South Korea, some conservative South Korea want the internal collapse of North Korea and absorb North Korea, like Germany. Okay? But we all know those kinds of unilateral unification is not achievable. Then North Korea proposed the federation model, meaning one nation, one state, two local governments, and two systems. But South Korea could not accept it. North Korea has a Suryong system, clearly the monolithic leadership system. We have a democracy. North Korea socialism, we have a capitalism. We couldn't do that. That is why in 1989, Notaehu government proposed the Korean Commonwealth unification model. That means what? First stage, exchange and cooperation. Second stage, as an interim stage, union of North-South Korean states, like the European Union. That means what? One nation, two states, two governments, two systems. However, let us promote exchange and cooperation. And let us promote peaceful coexistence. Let us institutionalize cooperation and integration. And after North and South Korea become similar, if North and South Korea achieve homogeneity, then we can ask our descendant to decide the ultimate form of unification. Therefore, when we have this kind of discussions, but problem is this: when conservative government, takes power, they emphasize unification through absorption, like a German model. That when the progressive take political power, they promote the union of North-South Korean states. Therefore, particularly youth in Korea was somewhat confused. Here again, I would say that still 60 to 70% of Korean people support unification through the union of North-South Korean states. It's the most realistic, okay? But nowadays, young people would oppose unification because they assume the unification will be taken form of German type. Therefore, they have to pay all the cost of unification. But that is not our government policy. Therefore, incremental unification, starting with cooperation and integration, is the best model for unification. When our government explained to the people, then I would say 60 to 70% of Korean people support that one. They do not want the division, but they want the unification. But the ultimate form of unification will take a much longer time. Then there got to be so-called incremental effort toward the cooperation and integration. But again, as President Ma knows well, the North Korean political system is different from us. For us, free flow of people, goods and services is easy. From North Korean side, free flow of people, goods and services is not easy. Therefore, even though there is a free flow of goods and people services between North and South, it will be very much controlled. It will be very much controlled. Therefore, my final point is this. Koreans as a whole support unification, but there is no consensus on which unification model, okay? But I would say that if they understand this incremental peaceful unification through integration, I think that 60 to 70% of Korean people would want it. Because Koreans want unification, but they want peace first. They do not want war on the Korean peninsula.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'll take one last question over there.
But no female question. There's one lady over there.
I immediately change my mind. Okay, then the lady over there, you will have the last question. No, raise your question.
Professor Moon, my question is, how do young generation in South Korea to see the future of Korean Peninsula situation? But it seems like you have already answered my question before, in the last question. But how do your government to solve that kind of problem? In the same way, do you have any suggestions toward Taiwan young generations to see their future of cross-strait relationship? Thank you.
But as I pointed out, all the 16 words given by President Ma has all the important points. You build the trust, okay, and set aside, contentious issues. Start with the easy thing, okay, and then you set aside the differences and seek the commonness, okay, and try to adopt the logic of a win-win, okay. And I think that actually is the most important one. In fact, the US 16 was very similar to President Kim Dae-jung's 16 was. That he argued that the civilian first, government later. Easy thing first, the difficult thing later. Giving first, taking later. Economy first, politics later. Those 16 words. He made that point in 1999 when he advocated the Sunshine Policy. Therefore, they're very similar, you know. Therefore, as to your question, it's very simple. You know, take everything just a normal, okay? Don't try to politicize, okay? You know, cross-strait relations, you know, you can have a peaceful relations, build the trust, exchange, then eventually there will be pattern of harmonization between the two. It will take some time. I would apply the same model to inter-Korean relations. We cannot expect a big breakthrough in the short time. It will take us some time to build the trust, promote exchange and cooperation, and have some institutional mechanism to guarantee cooperation and integration. It will take time.
Good afternoon, and I'm Emily, just graduated from NTU Japanese department. So, Professor, you have mentioned in the former dialogue that mentioned about the Northeast Asia community. So I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it's also promoted by Professor Wada Haruki, right? So we all know that community, it needs mutual trust between countries. So however, besides the US-China conflict, like Japan and Korea itself are already in a very severe tensions, right? So how is this community going to happen? Like, can we say it's a little bit not practical? Or if we are going to pursue this kind of community, how are we going to do it? Thank you.
Professor Wada Haruki, proposed the common house of Northeast Asia. Okay, it's very liberal and idealistic proposal toward the construction of community in Northeast Asia. I know it is very idealistic, but again, we start with the economy, free trade area, customs union, common market, economic union, monetary union. In parallel, we can start to have multilateral cooperation, multilateral security cooperation, discussions, and have some form of regime like OSCE, CSC's kind of models, and try to downsize the alliance pattern of collective defense system and trying to move toward the collective security system, of which principle is in the United Nations Charter. And there got to be, particularly role of civil society will be very, very important. It is, in fact, the citizens who, shape the future. Therefore, NGO cooperations, solidarity among civil society, all these things should work together to create a common house of Northeast Asia. But it's not easy. We have alliance, we have a hegemony competition between China and the United States. But we should set such a goal. In that way, we do not, in that way, we can avoid being trapped by hegemonic rivalry between China and the United States.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for everyone joining this extremely educating session. Please join me to give a big applause to our speakers.